Hello, for my author study, I chose the well-known author Beatrix Potter. Beatrix Potter is well known for writing the tale of Peter Rabbit and the Peter Rabbit series. Beatrix Potter was born July 28th, 1866 in Bolton Garden, South Kensington, London. She was the oldest child of Helen and Rupert Potter. Her younger brother was Walter. Beatrix Potter's parents, they had some artistic interest as well. Beatrix's father, Rupert, devoted himself to photography, and her mother, Helen, was skilled at embroidery and watercolors. Beatrix Potter's her childhood was rather lonely. Most of her education was done by governesses at home, and so she had little contact with other children until her brother was born. One thing that Beatrix really liked was the outdoors, and so her parents and her brother would vacation in Scotland, and during this time they had free roam of the estate that they lived at to explore. And so that was where Beatrix Potter, where she developed a strong interest in and a love for nature. And so one thing I found interesting, some of the pets that she kept were mice, frogs, bats, rabbits, and even a hedgehog. In early childhood, Potter also started to display a talent for drawing, and usually what her drawings were the animals and things that she saw in nature. The way that her books came about, her first book, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, was she wrote letters to her former governess Anne Moore's son. And then in 1901, Anne encouraged her to put these letters, into a book. So after many failed attempts of getting the book published, Beatrix, she decided to publish them herself. So her first book was The Tale of Peter Rabbit, was published in 1902, and she self-published 250 copies, and it was soon a huge success. Then years after that, there were several others, two to three books a year that she would publish. In 1905, Beatrix Potter, she bought Hilltop Farm in England, and it was here at Hilltop that became her artistic retreat. And it was here then that her one of her other well-known books, and one of my favorites, Jemima Puddle Duck, that she wrote that. Altogether, she wrote about 23 books in total, and of course the most notable being the Peter Rabbit series. And this book, Peter Rabbit, has been translated into 36 different languages and has sold tens of millions of copies. So today I'm going to share a little bit of the tale of Peter Rabbit with you. So, The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said Miss Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Miss McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Miss Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, Cotton, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straightway to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Look, there's Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not, unfortunately, run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter Rabbit, but Peter wiggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. Achoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Okay, we're going to stop there, and I'm going to share my activity with you now. The activity I chose was a Peter Rabbit book. So students would make the covers. So the cover, just a cutout of a rabbit, and then the rabbit face and eyes, and of course the whiskers. And then on the inside, there's different pages, and depending on age groups, it would depend on what students would complete. But like here, this was the story element, so the student would have to give the title and the author, and then the characters and the setting. Other activities that would be for younger children could be labeling the rabbit. So they would have this blank page, and then the cutouts come in the strip here that they would have to cut apart and then glue on to the appropriate place on their picture. Another little activity would be, which I really liked this one. Would you go into Mr. McGregor's garden? So then they'd have to circle yes or no, and then write a Y. And so again, this could be for older children. to complete.